So, let me get this straight, Bob said, scratching his head. You want a wall, a stone wall, around your entire yard, and you want it to look old? Ancient, I corrected. Historically inspired? Think Roman, think medieval, think Hadrian's Wall meets King Arthur's castle. Bob stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious, I said. I have issues with my HOA. I can see that, Bob said, still chuckling. All right, let's do it. But don't blame me if people start calling your house the fortress. I'm a man of simple pleasures. A good book, a comfortable chair, and a well-behaved dog. That's all I ask for. The dog, in this case, is a fluffy white Bichon Frise named Fluffy Butt. My daughter named him, don't judge. And Fluffy Butt, despite his diminutive size and generally angelic demeanor, has a penchant for exploring. Which is why I needed a fence. A simple, practical picket fence. Nothing fancy, just something to keep Fluffy Butt from embarking on unauthorized expeditions into the neighbor's rose bushes. I live in Heritage Hills, a neighborhood that takes its name very seriously. It's a pleasant enough place, with well-maintained homes and tree-lined streets. But there's an undercurrent of historical obsession that permeates everything. Up until now, I'd mostly avoided any major conflicts with the homeowners association. A few friendly reminders about lawn maintenance, a gentle suggestion to repaint my mailbox a more period-appropriate color, nothing I couldn't handle. But the fence, it seemed, was about to change all that. I submitted my fence plans to the HOA, as required. It was a standard white picket fence, the kind you see in countless suburban yards across America. Nothing offensive, nothing extravagant, just a simple, functional barrier. I expected a quick approval. What I got was a rejection notice. Fence design does not conform to the historical aesthetic of Heritage Hills, I read aloud, my voice laced with disbelief. Historical aesthetic? What historical aesthetic? We live in suburban Ohio, not colonial Williamsburg. I reread the notice, searching for some kind of explanation, some kind of logic. There was none. Just a vague, pretentious pronouncement about historical integrity. It sounded utterly made up. My initial reaction was confusion. Was this a joke? Had I accidentally stumbled into a historical reenactment society? But the confusion quickly morphed into annoyance, and then into a growing suspicion. This wasn't about history, it was about control. It was about the HOA, and specifically, I suspected, one particular member of the HOA flexing its arbitrary, historically obsessed muscles. The HOA meeting was held in the Heritage Hills Community Center, a building that, ironically, looked like it had been built in the 1970s. The meeting room, however, had been decorated to reflect the neighborhood's supposed historical theme. There were faux antique portraits on the walls, heavy velvet drapes on the windows, and a chandelier that looked suspiciously like it came from a discount lighting store. The board members sat at a long table, looking like a collection of extras from a low-budget historical drama. There was a man wearing a powdered wig, that was clearly askew, a woman in a bonnet that looked like it had been attacked by a flock of angry pigeons, and a couple of others who looked like they'd raided a costume shop's Colonial America section. And then there was Priscilla Thistlewick, the president of the Heritage Hills HOA and the self-proclaimed guardian of our neighborhood's historical integrity. She was an older woman, dressed in what I can only describe as a colonial Victorian Renaissance fair mashup outfit. It involved a long, flowing skirt, a ruffled blouse, a bonnet that defied both gravity and good taste, and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled something unpleasant. She carried herself with an air of authority that was entirely unearned, as if she were a queen surveying her, decidedly unhistorical, kingdom. Next item, Priscilla announced, her voice dripping with disdain. "Mr. Arthur Pendleton's fence." She said fence as if it were a 4-letter word. "It's just a picket fence, Miss Thistlewick," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "A simple white picket fence, to keep my dog from wandering." Priscilla fixed me with a steely gaze. "A picket fence, Mr. Pendleton," she declared, her voice rising in pitch, "is utterly inappropriate for Heritage Hills. It is modern, it is common. It is an affront to our historical heritage." "But it's a picket fence," I repeated, feeling a sense of bewildered frustration. "They've been around for centuries. I chose white specifically to not stand out." "Heritage Hills," Priscilla continued, ignoring my comment, "must maintain its historical integrity. We are a living museum, a testament to the... She seemed to be searching for the right historical reference. "The spirit of 70s colonial Williamsburg." "A living museum?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "With cars and satellite dishes and those inflatable holiday decorations that Mr. Henderson puts up every year?" I gestured towards a man on the board who was wearing a suspiciously modern-looking wristwatch. A few nervous coughs echoed through the room. Priscilla's face turned a shade of red that clashed violently with her, presumably, historically inaccurate lipstick. "Those are minor concessions to modernity, Mr. Pendleton," she sputtered. "Your fence, on the other hand, is a blatant disregard for our community's aesthetic guidelines." "But the guidelines don't say anything about picket fences," I pointed out, pulling out a copy of the HOA rule book, which I'd, of course, thoroughly studied. "They talk about appropriate materials and harmonious design. I think a white picket fence is perfectly harmonious." "Harmony," Priscilla declared, "is not achieved with mass-produced lumber and modern construction techniques. We must strive for authenticity, for... She trailed off, clearly grasping at straws. "For what, Miss Thistlewick?" I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. "For a historically inaccurate recreation of a time period that never actually existed? For a neighborhood filled with identical houses and people dressed in... that?" I gestured towards her outfit. Priscilla slammed her, presumably plastic, gavel down. "The fence," she declared, her voice shaking with rage, "is denied. Period." "Okay, Priscilla. No picket fence? Fine, I'd play her game. But I wouldn't play by her rules. I'd play by history's rules. Sort of." That night, fueled by a potent mixture of frustration, indignation, and a growing sense of mischievous glee, I started researching. Not fences, oh no. I went bigger. I started researching walls, ancient walls, medieval walls, Roman walls, fortifications, battlements, crenellations, moats. My internet search history quickly looked like a syllabus for a course on defensive architecture through the ages. I was fascinated. I mean, I'd always appreciated a good castle, but now I was studying them, analyzing them, deconstructing them. And, as I delved deeper into the world of historical fortifications, I realized something. These things were awesome. And, more importantly, they were the antithesis of everything Priscilla Thistlewick stood for. They were massive, imposing, and utterly impractical for a modern suburban neighborhood, which, of course, made them perfect. Hadrian's Wall kept coming up. That seemed like a great place to draw inspiration. I mean, if it's good enough to keep out the Picts and the Scots, surely it was good enough to keep out Karen. It was perfect. I would use all of them. A bit of Roman, a dash of medieval, a sprinkle of... whatever else I could find. It would be a historical mess. A glorious, beautiful, utterly ridiculous mess. And it would all be in the name of historical accuracy, of course. The HOA bylaws. My weapon of choice. I reread them, cover to cover, multiple times. I highlighted, underlined, and annotated every relevant passage. And then I found it. Buried deep within a section on exterior structures and landscaping was a vague, ambiguous clause about maintaining the historical character of Heritage Hills. It talked about appropriate materials, harmonious design, and structures that reflect the historical context of the community. There was a specific prohibition against modern fences that did not meet these guidelines. But, and this was the key, there was nothing about ancient stone walls. Historical context, I muttered, a slow grin spreading across my face. Oh, I'll give them historical context. It was a loophole big enough to drive a Roman chariot through. And I, Arthur Pendleton, was about to do just that. My plan was simple, in theory, but ludicrous in execution. I would build a wall. Not just any wall, but a massive stone wall. An ancient stone wall. A wall that would encircle my entire property. A monument to my defiance. A testament to my slightly unhinged determination to get back at Priscilla Thistlewick. But it wouldn't be just a wall. It would be a historical recreation. A mishmash of different architectural styles, deliberately anachronistic and utterly over the top. I'd have Roman arches, medieval crenellations, maybe even a small, non-functional moat. More of a decorative ditch, really. It would be a glorious, beautiful, historically inaccurate mess. And I would claim, with a perfectly straight face, that it was all in the name of preserving the historical character of Heritage Hills. I could already picture Priscilla's face, her perfectly coiffed hair practically standing on end, her eyes bulging with outrage. The thought made me giddy with anticipation. Construction day. It was less construction and more organized chaos. I'd hired a local stonemason, a burly guy named Bob, who seemed both amused and slightly bewildered by my request. So, let me get this straight, Bob said, scratching his head. You want a wall, a stone wall, around your entire yard, and you want it to look old? Ancient, I corrected. Historically inspired. Think Roman, think medieval, think Hadrian's Wall meets King Arthur's castle. Bob stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious, I said. I have issues with my HOA. I can see that, Bob said, still chuckling. All right, let's do it. But don't blame me if people start calling your house the fortress. The first delivery arrived. Tons of massive stones, rough-hewn and unevenly shaped. I'd specifically requested rustic materials to give the wall that authentic, built by a bunch of guys in togas look. Then came the sand, the gravel, the cement, and a small army of workers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else than assembling my ridiculous wall. The construction process was a spectacle. The stones were heavy, unwieldy, and deliberately not uniform. We weren't building a sleek, modern wall. We were building a ruin, a beautiful, glorious ruin. I incorporated elements from various historical periods, a section of Roman-style arches here, a stretch of medieval crenellations there, a random assortment of stones that looked like they'd been salvaged from a collapsed castle. The neighbors, of course, were fascinated. They gathered on their lawns, watching the construction with a mixture of confusion, amusement, and growing concern. "What is he doing?" I heard one whisper. "Is that a wall?" another asked. "It looks like a castle," a third said, sounding slightly alarmed. Fluffybutt, meanwhile, was utterly bewildered. He spent most of the day running around the yard, barking at the workers, getting underfoot, and generally adding to the chaos. My internal monologue was a constant stream of giddy anticipation. "Wait until Priscilla sees this," I muttered to myself over and over again. "She's going to lose her mind." There were, of course, a few minor setbacks. A delivery of stones got delayed, causing a temporary work stoppage. One of the workers accidentally dropped a large stone on his foot. He was fine, thankfully. And, at one point, a representative from the HOA, not Priscilla, thankfully, she was probably still recovering from the fence meeting, showed up, looking confused and vaguely threatening. "What is this?" he asked, gesturing towards the half-built wall. "It's a historical recreation," I said, with a perfectly straight face. "A tribute to the rich architectural heritage of, this area." He stared at me, speechless, then shook his head and walked away. I took that as a win, but despite the minor hiccups, the wall continued to rise, steadily, inexorably, transforming my ordinary suburban yard into something extraordinary, something ridiculous, something perfectly, beautifully, historically inaccurate, and I, Arthur Pendleton, was the architect of it all, the mad genius behind the wall, and I couldn't wait to see Priscilla's reaction. The unveiling of Arthur's Folly, as I'd affectionately nicknamed my wall, was a moment I'd been anticipating with glee, and Priscilla Thistlewick did not disappoint. She arrived, predictably, in a flurry of outrage, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. She stood there, on the sidewalk, staring at my wall, her mouth agape, her eyes bulging. It was a beautiful sight. "What?" she finally managed to choke out, her voice a strangled whisper that quickly escalated into a shriek. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind the wall, strolling casually towards her, a picture of calm composure. "Good afternoon, Priscilla," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my wall, I see." This is an abomination," she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the towering structure. It looks like a ruin." "It's a historical recreation, Priscilla," I corrected with a perfectly straight face, "a tribute to the rich architectural heritage of various historical periods." "Historical recreation?" she repeated, her voice reaching a pitch that only dogs could probably hear. "It's a monstrosity. It's preposterous." "I think it's rather charming," I said with a shrug. "Perfectly compliant with the HOA's historical aesthetic, I might add. Remember that clause? Structures appropriate to the historical context?" Priscilla's eyes narrowed. You did this on purpose," she accused, her voice shaking with rage. "On purpose," I repeated, feigning innocence. "I simply wanted to enhance my property with a historically inspired structure. I call it Arthur's Folly." "It's a folly, all right," she snapped. "A complete and utter folly." I then proceeded to give her a tour of the wall, pointing out its various and deliberately inaccurate historical features. "See these arches," I said, gesturing towards a section of the wall that looked vaguely Roman. "Inspired by the aqueducts of ancient Rome. Very impressive, don't you think? And these," I continued, pointing to a series of jagged, unevenly spaced crenellations along the top. "Classic medieval castle design. Perfect for defending against invading hordes, or, overly zealous HOA presidents." Priscilla was speechless. She just stared at the wall, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "And over there," I said, pointing towards a small, muddy ditch I'd dug along a section of the wall, "is the moat. Still a work in progress, of course. I'm thinking of adding some alligators, or maybe just some very aggressive goldfish." Priscilla finally found her voice, although it was barely a whisper. You can't do this," she stammered. I'll shut this down. I'll have this thing demolished." She turned and stormed off, her historical outfit billowing dramatically behind her. The emergency HOA meeting was, predictably, a circus. Priscilla, looking like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she'd been too busy plotting my demise, launched into a furious tirade, accusing me of everything from violating the spirit of Heritage Hills to creating a public safety hazard to single-handedly destroying the neighborhood's property values. "It's a wall!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the still faux antique community center. "A giant, ugly, historically inaccurate wall. It's an insult to everything we stand for." "Actually," I said, calmly addressing the board, "it's perfectly legal. I presented my case. The bylaws, specifically the glorious loophole of Rule Number 14C, the building permits, all properly obtained, and my interpretation of the HOA's beloved historical aesthetic. I even produced a historical document, a hastily drawn sketch on a piece of parchment that I'd aged with tea bags, depicting a wall that looked suspiciously like mine, with the caption, "Ancient Roman Medieval Whatever Fortress circa whenever." The other board members were a mixed bag. Some were clearly intimidated by Priscilla, nodding along to her every rant. Others looked confused, bewildered by the whole situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly amused. Then, Mr. Henderson, the real historian, not the firewood-stealing one, a quiet, unassuming man who lived down the street, spoke up. "Priscilla," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I've studied history for over 40 years, and I have to say, your interpretation of historical accuracy is, well, it's creative." He then turned to me, a twinkle in his eye. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, "your wall is certainly unique. While I can't say it's historically accurate, I must admit it has a certain charm, a certain audacity." Priscilla sputtered, speechless. The board, sensing a shift in the wind and a potential lawsuit, voted to table the discussion, pending further investigation. The meeting ended in a stalemate, with Priscilla looking like she was about to spontaneously combust, and me feeling a surge of triumphant and slightly smug satisfaction. But the war, as they say, was far from over. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the Siege of Heritage Hills. Priscilla, obsessed with bringing down my wall, launched a full-scale assault. She complained to the city, claiming the wall was a safety hazard, a structural abomination, and a violation of countless building codes. City inspectors came, they measured, they inspected, and they found nothing. The wall was perfectly legal. She organized protests. Well, protest is a strong word. It was more like a handful of her loyal and increasingly dwindling supporters standing on the sidewalk, holding up poorly made signs that read, "Down with the wall," and "Make Heritage Hills beige again." She even, I suspect, attempted some minor vandalism. I found a few scratches on one of the stones, easily buffed out, and a suspicious-looking stain that looked suspiciously like prune juice. Priscilla was a known prune enthusiast. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move, and I, of course, responded in kind. I added a guard tower to the wall, really just a small wooden platform with a railing, perfect for enjoying a morning cup of coffee and surveying my domain. I installed a completely non-functional trebuchet on my lawn, aimed directly at Priscilla's house. I flew a ridiculous medieval banner from the top of the wall, depicting a fluffy white dog rampant on a field of green, a tribute to Fluffybutt, of course. And because why not, I hosted a medieval feast in my backyard, inviting all the neighbors, except Priscilla, naturally. We had roast chicken, giant turkey legs, and plenty of mead. Actually just apple cider, but don't tell anyone. I even dressed up as a king, wearing a plastic crown and wielding a foam sword. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. The neighbors loved it. The local news even showed up, filming a segment about the Great Wall of Heritage Hills. And Priscilla? She just got angrier and more desperate and more soaked. Because, of course, the sprinklers were still in place, and they were still accidentally going off whenever she got too close. It was the little things, you know? It's been a year since the Siege of Heritage Hills, as it's now, affectionately, I think, known in the neighborhood. And I have to say, life behind the wall has been interesting. Arthur's Folly, my magnificent, historically inaccurate, HOA loophole-exploiting stone wall, still stands. It's become more than just a wall. It's a landmark. A tourist attraction, a minor one, but still. A constant source of amusement, for everyone except, presumably, Priscilla Thistlewick. People actually drive by just to see it. I've seen families posing for pictures in front of it, kids pretending to be knights storming a castle, and even a few history buffs, bless their hearts, trying to identify the various architectural styles. I've even started giving impromptu tours, explaining the completely fabricated history of the wall, pointing out the Roman arches, the medieval crenellations, and the ancient mystical energy that emanates from the stones. It's just limestone, but don't tell anyone. Priscilla? She's gone. Vanished. Sold her house and moved away, presumably to a community with no historical pretensions whatsoever. I heard a rumor that she's now living in a modern, minimalist condo complex surrounded by concrete and glass. I can only imagine how that's going for her. Heritage Hills, as a whole, has undergone a subtle but significant transformation. There's a newfound appreciation for historical inaccuracy, a greater tolerance for individuality, a sense that maybe, just maybe, it's okay to have a little fun, to be a little different, to build a giant, ridiculous wall around your property if you feel like it. A new family moved into Priscilla's old house a few months ago. The new neighbor, a friendly guy named Mark, stopped by one afternoon while I was, inspecting my wall, making sure the trebuchet was still properly aimed, of course. "So," Mark said, gesturing towards the imposing structure with a bewildered expression, "why do you have a medieval castle wall around your house?" I grinned, leaning against a particularly large and particularly non-historical stone. "Oh," I said casually, "just an HOA misunderstanding." Mark blinked. Misunderstanding?" "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Long story. Involves a picket fence, a fluffy white dog, and a woman with a very strong opinion about historical accuracy. Let's just say things escalated." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Well," he said, "I think it's amazing. It certainly gives the neighborhood character." "That's what I told them," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. "And it keeps the riffraff out. Or at least it keeps certain HOA presidents out." And as I stood there, in the shadow of my magnificent, ridiculous wall, the sun setting behind it, casting long, dramatic shadows across my, now HOA-approved lawn, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I'd fought the good fight. I'd defended my right to have a wall. And I'd won. The HOA was still around, of course, but they were different. More cautious, more respectful. And definitely less likely to mess with my property, but just in case, I've been brainstorming some new additions. Maybe a dragon for the top of the wall, a smoke machine, some strategically placed red lights, and a recorded roar that activates whenever someone approaches the gate. Or perhaps a series of hidden speakers that play medieval battle music at random intervals. The possibilities are endless. And as long as there are HOAs and overly zealous rule enforcers, I, Arthur Pendleton, defender of the historically inaccurate, will be ready. Bring on the next challenge. My wall and my imagination are ready. It began with a seemingly innocuous letter tucked neatly into my mailbox amongst the bills and junk mail. Notice of lawn care violation, it proclaimed in bold, official-looking font. I frowned, my gaze drifting to my perfectly acceptable lawn. It was green, it was mowed, it was a lawn. What could possibly be wrong with it? I unfolded the letter, my confusion growing with each line. Apparently, my grass blades were an egregious 3.2 inches long, a blatant violation of the HOA's strictly enforced 2.5-inch regulation. A fine of $25 was enclosed, a stark reminder of the HOA's power and my apparent lawn care negligence. 2.5 inches? I muttered to myself, shaking my head. Who measures grass with a ruler? But the HOA, it seemed, did. And they weren't afraid to wield their measuring tape with an iron fist. The violations escalated. A fine for a patch of discoloration, caused by a rogue sprinkler head, I later discovered. Another fine for non-uniform greenness. Apparently, a few blades of a slightly lighter shade had infiltrated my otherwise perfectly acceptable lawn. And then, the most ridiculous fine of all, a $50 penalty for seasonal decorations that clash with the neighborhood aesthetic. The offending decoration, a small, tasteful pumpkin I had placed on my porch for Halloween. "A pumpkin?" I exclaimed to my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, who was tending to her prize-winning roses, which, I suspected, were also in violation of some obscure HOA regulation. "They fine me for a pumpkin?" Mrs. Higgins chuckled, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Don't you know, Ben? Pumpkins are disruptive. They clash with the... what was it? Ah, yes, the harmonious flow of the suburban landscape." I rolled my eyes. "Harmonious flow? It's a pumpkin, Mrs. Higgins, not a flock of flamingos." But the HOA, under the leadership of the newly elected president, Karen McDictator, yes, that Karen, was on a mission to enforce their vision of suburban perfection, no matter how absurd. They were obsessed with control, with uniformity, with turning our neighborhood into a Stepford suburb where every lawn was identical, every house was painted beige, and every resident was a mindless drone conforming to their ridiculous rules. The third fine, however, was the final straw. It arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a bright orange envelope mocking me with its cheerful hue and its grim message. "Notice of lawn care violation," it proclaimed. "The offense? One fallen leaf observed on the property. Immediate removal required." I stared at the notice, my blood pressure rising faster than the morning sun. A single leaf? They were fining me for a single leaf? This was beyond ridiculous. It was an act of war. "That's it," I muttered to myself, crumpling the notice in my fist. "They've pushed me too far. If they want a perfect lawn, I'll give them a perfect lawn. But it won't be the lawn they're expecting." A mischievous grin spread across my face. It was time for Operation Snowpocalypse. The fallen leaf incident was my Rubicon. There was no going back. The HOA, with their petty tyranny and their obsession with lawn perfection, had awakened a rebellious spirit within me I didn't know I possessed. My initial frustration morphed into a steely resolve. If they wanted a perfect lawn, I'd give them a perfect lawn. But it wouldn't be the manicured 2.5-inch, uniformly green lawn of their HOA-approved dreams. It would be something different. The idea, as brilliant as it was absurd, struck me in the middle of the night. I sat bolt upright in bed, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. "A snow machine," I whispered to myself, the words echoing in the darkness. A giant, ridiculous snow-making machine. It was perfect. It was petty. It was the ultimate act of defiance against the HOA's lawn-obsessed tyranny. They wanted a perfect lawn year-round? Fine. I'd give them a winter wonderland, even in the middle of July. Let's see how their precious 2.5-inch rule holds up against a foot of artificial snow. The next morning, fueled by coffee and a potent cocktail of righteous indignation and petty glee, I set about making my vision a reality. I dove into the depths of the internet, researching snow machines with the fervor of a child searching for the perfect Christmas present. I wasn't interested in those flimsy, backyard snowmaking contraptions you find at your local hardware store. No, I wanted the big guns. The kind of snow machine they use at ski resorts. The kind that could blanket my entire yard in a thick layer of fluffy, artificial snow. I found it. A behemoth of a machine. A gleaming monstrosity of metal and pipes, capable of producing enough snow to bury a small village. It was absurdly oversized for my suburban lawn, a fact that only added to its appeal. I imagined the HOA's faces when they saw this thing parked in my driveway, a snow-spewing testament to my defiance. The purchase was a whirlwind of credit card swipes and hurried phone calls. I arranged for delivery, my excitement growing with each passing hour. This wasn't just a snow machine. It was a symbol of my rebellion, a weapon in my war against the HOA's petty tyranny, and I couldn't wait to unleash it. The arrival of the snow machine was a spectacle in itself. It was delivered on a flatbed truck, its massive form dwarfing my modest suburban home. The driver, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and a twinkle in his eye, whistled as he surveyed the scene. "You sure you got the right address, buddy?" he asked, a grin spreading across his face. "This thing's usually headed for the mountains, not the burbs." "It's the right address," I assured him, returning the grin. "And trust me, it's going to be put to good use." The installation was a community effort. My neighbors, tired of the HOA's tyranny and eager for a bit of entertainment, rallied to the cause. We spent the afternoon maneuvering the behemoth into my backyard, its pipes and nozzles snaking across the lawn like a metallic serpent. We disguised it with tarps and strategically placed bushes, a covert operation designed to keep the HOA's watchful eyes at bay. It was a scene straight out of a spy movie, except instead of nuclear warheads, we were hiding a snow machine. "Think they'll notice?" Mrs. Higgins asked, adjusting a potted fern to obscure a particularly conspicuous nozzle. "They'll notice," I replied, a mischievous glint in my eye. "But not until it's too late. The first snowfall was glorious. I woke up early, eager to witness the HOA's reaction. I flipped the switch, and the machine roared to life, spewing a torrent of fluffy, white snow across my lawn. Within minutes, my yard was transformed into a winter wonderland, a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured HOA-approved lawns surrounding it. Karen, naturally, was the first to notice. Her shriek of outrage echoed through the neighborhood, a symphony of disbelief and fury. I watched from my window as she stormed across the street, her face contorted in a mask of pure indignation. "What have you done?" she screeched, her voice barely audible above the whirring of the snow machine. "This is outrageous! This is an abomination!" "An abomination, Karen?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But you wanted a perfect lawn, didn't you? Uniformly white, no exceptions. I'm simply complying with the HOA's high standards." Karen sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "This isn't what we meant. This is artificial." "Artificial?" I chuckled. "But Karen, snow is just frozen water. It's perfectly natural. And besides," I added, gesturing towards a sign I had strategically placed near the snow machine, "it's just seasonal decor." "'Tis the season to be jolly, after all." Karen's eye twitched. She opened her mouth to retort, but I continued, my voice dripping with mock sincerity. "And to ensure the HOA board members feel extra festive," I said, pressing a button on a remote control, "I've added a few special touches." Suddenly, the air filled with the sound of synchronized Christmas music, a chorus of jingle bells and deck the halls echoing through the neighborhood. Candy cane lights strategically placed around the snow-covered lawn blinked in sync with the music, creating a dazzling, albeit slightly terrifying spectacle. Karen's face was now a symphony of emotions: anger, confusion, disbelief, and a hint of fear. She stared at the snow, the lights, and the sign proclaiming, "Lawn maintained at perfect consistency year-round," with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. She had been out-pettied, out-maneuvered, and out-Christmased, and the snow, that beautiful, fluffy, artificial snow, was just the beginning. The HOA's response to my winter wonderland was a predictable blend of outrage and bureaucratic flailing. They convened an emergency meeting, their faces grim, their rulebooks clutched like shields against the encroaching snow. I could practically hear Karen's voice echoing through the walls of their pristine headquarters, demanding my immediate compliance with something. "There must be a rule against this," she shrieked, her voice laced with desperation. "Artificial snow, it's unnatural, it's disruptive, it's a violation of the spirit of the community." The HOA board members, a collection of equally flustered and rule-obsessed individuals, scrambled to find a loophole, a bylaw, anything that could justify their outrage. But their frantic search was in vain. The HOA rulebook, that Bible of suburban regulation, was surprisingly silent on the matter of artificial snow. "There's nothing in here about precipitation," Mr. Henderson, the perpetually flustered HOA president, stammered, his finger tracing the lines of the rulebook with a trembling hand. But the aesthetic?" another board member sputtered. "It's disruptive. It clashes with the harmonious flow of the summer landscape." I, ever the helpful neighbor, decided to offer my assistance. "Disruptive aesthetics?" I echoed, a mischievous glint in my eye. "But, Karen, you were the one who insisted on a uniformly green lawn. No exceptions. Snow is white. White is uniform. I'm simply providing a consistent aesthetic experience year-round." Karen's eye twitched. "That's not what we meant," she retorted. This is artificial lawn modification." "Artificial?" I chuckled. "But Karen, snow is just frozen water. It's perfectly natural, just like rain or your tears of frustration." The HOA board members exchanged bewildered glances. They were trapped in their own logic, their arguments crumbling like a poorly built snowman. They had no legal basis to challenge my snow, no rule to enforce, no justification for their outrage. They were powerless, defeated by their own obsession with control and my unwavering commitment to pettiness. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had embraced my winter wonderland with open arms. Children, deprived of the joys of snow due to our perpetually sunny climate, flocked to my yard, their laughter echoing through the streets as they built snowmen, had snowball fights, and generally reveled in the unexpected winter magic. "This is the best day ever," I overheard one child exclaim, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "It's like Christmas in July." Even the adults couldn't resist the charm of the artificial snow. They gathered on my lawn, sipping hot cocoa, because why not, and marveling at the absurdity of it all. The HOA's attempts to spoil the fun only solidified their image as the neighborhood villains, the Grinch-like figures trying to steal the community's joy. "Those HOA folks are crazy," one neighbor exclaimed, shaking his head. "Trying to ban snow? What's next? Sunshine?" The HOA's outrage had backfired spectacularly. They had inadvertently created a community gathering space, a source of joy and laughter, and a symbol of defiance against their petty tyranny. And the snow, that beautiful, fluffy, artificial snow, was just the beginning. The HOA's outrage, ironically, became my greatest marketing tool. News of my snow-covered lawn, a defiant middle finger to their petty tyranny, spread like wildfire through the community and beyond. It wasn't long before the first wave of influencers arrived, their phones held high, ready to capture the spectacle for their eager followers. "This is amazing," I overheard one influencer exclaim, her voice echoing across my snow-covered lawn as she posed for a selfie with a snowman. "It's like a winter wonderland in the middle of summer. #snowpocalypse, #HOFL, #petty revenge goals." The hashtags did their magic. My yard became a social media sensation, a viral symbol of defiance against HOA overreach. Influencers flocked to my lawn, their brightly colored outfits clashing spectacularly with the pristine white snow. They filmed videos, took photos, and interviewed me about my bold stance against the HOA. My story, the story of the man who dared to defy the lawn police, was shared and reshared, liked and commented on, until it reached a level of internet fame I never could have imagined. The HOA, of course, was mortified. Their attempts to control the narrative backfired spectacularly. Every news article, every social media post, every influencer's video painted them as the villains, the humorless bureaucrats trying to crush the community's joy. Their carefully crafted image of authority crumbled under the weight of public ridicule and a mountain of artificial snow. And then the snowball effect, pun intended, took hold. Inspired by my defiance, other neighbors joined the rebellion. Snow machines, once a rarity in our perpetually sunny suburb, became the must-have item of the season. Lawns across the neighborhood transformed into winter wonderlands, a collective middle finger to the HOA's tyranny. "If Ben can do it, so can we," Mr. Johnson, my perpetually grumpy neighbor, declared as he unveiled his own snow machine, a slightly smaller but equally impressive model. "Those HOA busybodies can't tell us what to do with our own yards." Mrs. Higgins, never one to be outdone, went all out, creating a winter-themed wonderland complete with ice sculptures, a miniature skating rink, and a life-sized Santa Claus made entirely of snow. "It's called seasonal decor, Karen," she announced triumphantly as Karen drove by, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The neighborhood was transformed. Streets once lined with perfectly manicured lawns now resembled a scene from a Christmas movie, a surreal and hilarious juxtaposition of palm trees and snowdrifts. The HOA's attempts to enforce uniformity had backfired spectacularly, creating a community united in its defiance, a winter wonderland born from the ashes of their petty tyranny. And the snow, that beautiful, fluffy, artificial snow, was just the beginning. The HOA, facing a full-blown PR crisis and a neighborhood that resembled the North Pole in July, called an emergency meeting. It was a desperate attempt to regain control, to reassert their authority over a community that was quickly slipping from their grasp. But their carefully laid plans backfired spectacularly, thanks to a little bit of mischief and a well-timed phone call. I received the meeting notice, a flimsy piece of paper demanding my presence to discuss my unacceptable lawn decorations. A mischievous grin spread across my face. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an opportunity. I contacted the local news stations, the newspapers, even a few online bloggers, inviting them to witness the HOA's desperate attempt to crush the spirit of Christmas. Or, summer, whatever. The meeting room was packed. HOA board members, their faces pale and drawn, sat at the head of the table, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. Karen, her usual air of authority replaced by a palpable sense of panic, nervously adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Ben," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we've called this meeting to discuss your excessive snow." "Excessive?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "But Karen, you were the one who insisted on a uniformly white lawn. I'm simply providing a consistent aesthetic experience year-round." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. The reporters, sensing a good story, scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Karen's eye twitched. "This isn't what we meant," she sputtered. This is disruptive. It's... She searched for the right word. The word that would encapsulate the HOA's outrage and justify their desperate attempt to regain control. "It's un-American," she finally declared, her voice rising in indignation. "It's a blatant attack on the sanctity of summer. It's a war on Christmas." The room erupted. The reporters, their cameras flashing, couldn't believe their luck. "HOA declares war on Christmas," the headlines screamed. "Suburban tyrants try to ban snow." The HOA's attempt to control the narrative had backfired spectacularly, turning them into the Grinch-like villains of a real-life holiday movie. And then,
The city got involved. The mayor, a jovial man with a penchant for publicity, saw an opportunity. "Year-round snow in our sunny city?" he declared in a press conference. "It's brilliant. It's unique. It's a potential tourist attraction." He announced plans for a Winter Wonderland Festival, a citywide celebration of my snow-covered lawn and the community's defiance against the HOA's tyranny. The HOA's authority was further undermined, their power waning in the face of public opinion and the city's enthusiastic embrace of the absurd. The HOA board members, defeated and demoralized, could only watch as their carefully constructed world of rules and regulations crumbled around them. They had become a laughingstock, a symbol of bureaucratic overreach and petty tyranny. And the snow, that beautiful, fluffy, artificial snow, had become a symbol of freedom, a testament to the power of community and the enduring spirit of Christmas, even in July. My snow-covered lawn, once a symbol of defiance, evolved into a beloved neighborhood attraction. The HOA's attempts to ban it had backfired spectacularly, transforming my yard into a haven for snow-deprived children and a quirky landmark that drew curious visitors from far and wide. I leaned into the absurdity, hosting snow day parties, complete with hot cocoa, snowball fights, and impromptu snowman building competitions. I even started charging a small admission fee, a cheeky nod to the HOA's obsession with fines, and a surprisingly lucrative venture. $5 for a snowball fight in July? One visitor chuckled as he handed me a crisp bill. Worth every penny. The HOA, meanwhile, could only watch in impotent fury as my snow-covered lawn became a symbol of their defeat. Their authority had been undermined, their rules rendered meaningless, and their carefully constructed image of suburban control shattered. The final blow came in the form of Karen's resignation. She stormed into the next HOA meeting, her face a mask of defeat and resentment. "I can't take it anymore," she shrieked, her voice cracking with emotion. "The snow, the laughter, the joy, it's unbearable." The remaining board members, a collection of weary and demoralized individuals, exchanged glances. Mr. Henderson, the perpetually flustered president, sighed. "Karen," he said, his voice laced with a hint of pity, "perhaps it's time to let it go." "Let it go?" Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. But, the rules, the aesthetics, the order." "The order is gone, Karen," Mrs. Higgins, a former HOA dissenter turned snow enthusiast, chimed in. "And good riddance. We're having fun. The kids are happy, and you're the only one who seems to have a problem with it." Karen's shoulders slumped. She looked around the room, her gaze meeting the amused eyes of her former subjects. She had lost. She had lost to a snow machine, a community's rebellious spirit, and a healthy dose of petty revenge. "Fine," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "I resign." And with that, she stormed out of the room, her reign of HOA tyranny finally over. The snow machine, once a symbol of defiance, had become a symbol of victory, a testament to the power of community and the enduring appeal of a good snowball fight, even in the middle of summer.